project. And our role in this project is really mainly to support the project in delivering a sustainable, business-friendly solution at the end of the project. So we from the beginning, we try to really help our partners in understanding what is open source, what does it mean to get rid of some cliche, and also after that to support them in communication and dissemination to the developers, community of developers, because you can build the best solution if you only talk with your peers, you only talk with your end users, and you don't try to attract developers to your software. Then you have very few chance to sustain the code that you develop. Okay, so I will start with some reminders in case it's not very clear, and maybe to get rid of some misunderstanding about free software versus open source software, for example. Free software is actually defined by four freedom rules. The first freedom is the fact that you can run the program as you wish for any purpose. So it can be for something fun, but if the guy who has your code decided to use it for other purpose, he can do it. It's his first freedom. Second freedom is the freedom to study the code, to have access to all the source code. Even he can change it. So it means that he can recompile, adapt it to his own needs. You have no way to reject this possibility for him. The third freedom that the user of your code has as a free software that you decide to share with him is the freedom to redistribute. So you can decide to redistribute for free, as you did it. You give it for free to the open source community. But now if he is, maybe it's a niche or whatsoever, he found somebody who's ready to pay for that, he can also decide to sell it. It's his decision, and you cannot go against that. He can commercialize the code, even if it's doesn't own it. I can take just a simple example. Red Hat based all his business starting in 1999 by just grabbing Linux and putting on the CD and sell the CD in the nice red box. Of course, they had few more software in the CDs to be able to help people to deploy their solution, but globally it was what they were doing, and most of the code was an open source code. And actually, they could sell a bunch of boxes just because the service they were providing was just great. And so often people are making money on some open source solutions just because they provide a service on top of an open source solution. Last but not least, freedom is a freedom to redistribute a modified copy of the code. So he has access to the code, he has access to the source code, he can modify it, can adapt it to some special needs, and he can give it for free if he wants, or he can also sell it and make more money on that. And I will say that Red Hat is certainly in this case the most evident example, because they had some capabilities on that. So the problem with free and the word of free software was a strong ambiguity from the beginning, that people understood free as a free beer, when actually free meant in the guy who invented this wording, Richard Stallman from the MIT, was free as a free speech. So it's very important to understand that when you free, you just give this freedom to others to use your code, to edit it. I will not tell you the full story of Richard Stallman, which is actually very interesting, why he decided to launch this movement around free software. But it's very important to understand that it doesn't mean it's free, because indeed, when you develop some free software, open source software, it's not free neither for the developers or for the user. Of the consumer. And we at Eclipse Foundation, we try to explain to everybody, consumers as developers, that there is some commitment in both sides. And if you reuse open source, if you want that the code that you use stay free and stay maintained, you need to provide feedbacks. You need to at least thank developers when they are doing the development. We say you have to be a good citizen. But the same story with developers. Developers, if you give it for free, we know that it costs you time and money, but if you really want to make it available for a long run and people will continue to be interested in your software, you need to provide useful documentation. You need to answer quickly to any request, any question, any issue that your user can find. So after that, what's the difference with open source software? Actually, it's are very synonymous, but when you see the definition of open source, which is here and comes from the open source initiative organization, you realize that we retrieve all the freedoms that I mentioned before. I mentioned that F1, F2, and so on, and some new rules which are not very clear or mentioned before, like integrity of the authors. So you realize that in open source definition, we start to be interested not only about how people use the code, but also about the guys who develop the code. And for example, integrity of the authors means that if you reuse the code, if you change the code, you cannot remove the ownership of the code. The code is still owned, has been developed by these guys. If you extend it, if you contribute to the code, you can add your name behind, but you cannot remove. You can say, okay, now it's my code because I changed even 70% of the code have been changed by me, so now it's my code. No, it's still the code of the initial owner. One important thing. License. If the owner decided to deliver his code under one type of license, you must respect this license. You can say, no, I don't like this license. It's a GPL license. It's not very friendly for my business. So I will change for an Apache license, which is more friendly. Forget it. You cannot do it. If somebody has to change, it's the owner of the code. So all the community who owns the code has to decide all together, yes, we want to change from one type of license to another one, but you cannot decide to change for another license. And it's very important element, and I will mention that later on also. You can also have a specificity of the product. You cannot say, okay, it only works with this software. And by the way, this software, you have to pay for it. So a part of the code is free, but the other one is not. You cannot play with this kind of game. So if you deliver something free, the consumer of your code should be able to download it, install it totally for free, and run it. Maybe you will have not a full feature because you might not have a professional connection to a professional database, but nevertheless, you should be able to deliver something where the database is open source, so you can run it as a good example, and not restricted to restrict other software. So it means that you cannot limit the usage that again you can run on with some software. And the last not least, also technology neutrality means that you can say, okay, guys, it's free if you run it on Linux, but if you decide to use Windows or Mac OS, then you will have to pay. It's free for anybody. If they want to port your code and run it on any other platform, they can do it freely. So it's important to see that, yes, open source definition, extend a little bit the definition and start to pay attention more about the owner of the code. And it's also important to take that under consideration. And the naming convention has really changed because people wanted to get rid of this ambiguity in this English word with free. Okay, now key point, open source is all about license, nothing but license. And if you understand the licenses, you understand most of the aspect of the open source. Recently, a Forrester study shown that actually today, when you have something like 80% of application 80% of companies today are developing some product based on open source. And when you see this code, 80 to 90% of this code is open source. So we all sit, as soon as we start developing, we all sit on the shoulder of a giant, which are these open source solutions. So we have to pay attention on this open source code, not only because of the license, but of course, because of some vulnerabilities. And there are some cyber acts in Europe these days who have been launched to understand what's going on in this kind of code. And you need to pay attention on that, and you cannot ignore and say just, oh, I'm happy I use this code, it works well with my application, so I can just deliver my code. No, you have to pay attention. And it's typically the kind of role that we Eclipse play in research project. We help digging into all the dependency of a project to figure out if there is not some weakness or some issue with some dependency with some code which jeopardize all the rest of the project, and finally the project cannot be really open source or cannot be open source under the license that the project decide to go. Let's me dig into that a little bit more. So to understand the licensing, first you have to understand the copyright. Copyrights today on software and start in 1978. As soon as you write 10 lines of code, the code is yours. And it will stay yours unless you decide something else. So you own the code. So there is no, if you put your code, you give it to an open source foundation, or you decide to share it, it's still your code. But to be totally clear with everybody else, you need to put a copyright header on top of your code to say, hey guys, it's my code. I can decide to share under certain license, but it's I own this code. And it's very important to understand that. The other aspect to understand that, and when I say it's your code, actually it's not really your code, you as a developer, but you as a software company. So you work for a company, and in 90%, maybe 99% of the case, if you check your contract, the contract will say, hey, actually the code that you develop is not owned by you, but it's owned by your company. Germany is a little bit different. I say you can mention both, or you have to mention both. There are some specific rules, and we are aware of that. But it's important to mention always the organization you work for and the company. It can be a big issue in open source because sometimes for example, in our research project, we are working a lot with universities, and universities employ sometimes some students which don't have a contract. For example, it's an internship for master degree students, and master degree students. So if he has no contract, the code is his code. So if the university decides at some point to open source their code, they need to have the agreement of all the contributors of this code. So usually, if it's university can say, okay, we own this code. So yes, you have the freedom to open source the code. But if there are some students, they have to ask to each student one by one if they agree to do that. So sometimes it can be an issue because if you are not able to retrieve the students, we accept the fact that you are more to find it. But if you find a student can always come back later on and say, hey guys, I didn't give you the authorization to open source this code, so this code is mine. I did it during my master degree, and so you have to give me all the money or whatsoever you did with that to give me back the money. So it's an important issue. Another aspect also, which is covered by licenses and copyright and so on, it's patents. Often we have also people are scared, and it can be either some researchers or some SMEs. They say, hey guys, if I open source my code, I lose my patent. No, you have to understand clearly that you have the copyright, and copyright will protect you the expression of your idea. So it's your idea, it's expressed. Now, if you have some very cool, smart idea inside your code, you will use a patent to protect the idea. You don't protect, the patent doesn't protect your code, it protects the idea behind the code. So by doing that, it means that if somebody uses your code, if you patent the idea behind your code, he cannot decide to, oh, I found this idea really cool, I will write it in different way, in a different software language or whatsoever. You cannot do that because it's your idea under your patent. Now, if it's just a copyright, so okay, you can decide, okay, if you consider that your idea is more the software which is interesting by itself, so there is not a fantastic idea behind that, but just the fact that you were able to build a nice architecture, then you consider that your code is enough and you have your copyright, and people are more than happy to reuse your code like that. So be aware that between patent and copyright are two different meanings, and it's important to understand these differences. Now, in terms of licenses, when you start digging into licenses and you will go to the Open Source Initiative website, you will realize that I didn't update this website, this page recently, but in 2024, there are more than 120 open source licenses. Indeed, in early 2000, 2010, everybody wanted to have this license. So almost every university wanted to have one because yes, the MIT has one, the BSD Berkeley has one as well. So everybody wanted to have this license. After that, each big organization said, yes, also I want to have my own license. And at some point where I say, hey guys, stop doing that because it creates a big mess inside. People don't understand what is the difference between this license and that license. So let's stay attached to a certain list of licenses which cover all the needs that we have. And this list is here. So we have 10 licenses. So it can be GPL, LGPL, MPL, BSD, MIT. I will explain these different licenses. For your information, the demo project decided to use the Apache license. So it's a permissive license, and I will explain the difference between all these different licenses now. So it means as well that when you will develop in your open calls some software, you will have to be compatible with the Apache license. So what are the licenses? So I like to show this spectrum, which gives you a good idea of the different licenses. You have, of course, at the first level, less permissive possible licenses are proprietary licenses. And we know this kind of licenses. When you buy software, usually you go and you see the license. The license says that you can use this software only on one machine, one person. You cannot duplicate the code whatsoever. You have some strong limitations. So it's very clearly defined. It's proprietary license, fair enough. But it's how the guy who developed the code decided to share his code with the rest of the world. After that, you have non-commercial licenses. Non-commercial licenses say, hey guys, you can use my code, but you cannot make business with that. And I remind you that it's typically one of the third freedom of the free software. It's not, so it doesn't mean that it means that it's not an open source or free software license, this kind of non-commercial license, because you don't authorize others to do whatever they want with that. After that, we have strong copyleft licenses. Strong copyleft licenses, it's based on reciprocity. The guy say, hey guys, I share my code with you, and there's this license, but if you use my code, you have to follow exactly the same license. So it means that you have to share with the rest of the world also totally freely. So it's a nice message that you throw to the rest of the world, but for business point of view, it's very difficult. So lots of people are facing issues when they have to use some code under the GPL license, because it's for this reason that sometimes we name this kind of license viral license, is because you force others who will be using your code to follow the same license. So AGPL or GPL, we Eclipse are not pushing on this direction because we work a lot with industries, and we know that when an industry studies some code and look for some open source solutions, if they see that you are under the GPL or AGPL, they just run away. They don't take the risk because they don't want to have after that plenty of issue with the owners, and they want to keep maybe their added value on top of the open source platform they use or they build. They want to have their added value proprietary to be able to sell it. For this reason that you have to move to the weak copyleft licenses, which also have some reciprocity, and the one I can mention is certainly the Eclipse one. And the reciprocity is on the fact that we say, you can use totally free our code. You can use, or you can sell it, your code on top of that. You don't need to make it open as well like in GPL. But if you find some bugs in our code, in a code under the EPL license, Eclipse Public License, or if you add some capability, some feature on that, you have to give it back. So it's really, if you fix a bug or if you add some capability on the core technology, you have to give it back. It's really a community spirit, right? You take advantage of some code, so try to give it back to the community as well when you find a bug. So it's for us important. So if you improve it for some reason, you improve the speed or whatsoever, and you don't give it back, then people who are under the EPL license can sue you because you didn't respect the Eclipse Public license. After that, you have permissive licenses, and these permissive licenses like Apache, BSD, MIT, they give you a total freedom to do whatever you want. So they don't bother you. Maybe there is small request for BSD. If you use some software under the BSD license, they ask you to reference in your release note that you are using this code. But if you use Apache, MIT, they don't ask you to mention. You just use them and that's it. So for this reason, that often people like Apache, MIT because they don't have they don't need to feel concerned. So what we recommend in terms of licenses, it's to use this kind of license. In open calls, for us, it's very important because you join this research project. This research project is willing really to go open source and to let people build solution on that, some free solution or some commercial solutions. So if you adopt another license, or called public domain, of course, as well, but if you adopt a non-commercial license or something like that, or you use license, third-party dependency, which has this kind of license, then automatically you might jeopardize the whole project because Nemo can decide at some point, find your code very interesting and say, hey, we would love to integrate your feature, your capability inside our core platform, Nemo platform, and they will not be able to do it because you had this kind of restriction with a GPL license, for example, with a non-commercial license. So here it's to explain you a little bit how it works, dependencies. We analyzed recently Nemo, and I want to be sure it's something. We had something like 1,300 or 1,500 different third-party dependencies. So you take the code, the root of the code, and you go through all the dependency and dependency of dependency, and we had a total of 1,300. So it's very difficult for anybody to go through the review of all these things. Today you can find free software, free open source solution or commercial solution, which helps you going through these dependencies and help you identify some potential issue. For example, here I show an example. We were able to identify some guys with third-party dependency, which are Apache, great. Some other were GPL, some other were Eclipse with dependency with an Apache. And then automatically we can say, maybe there is an issue with some GPL licenses. So it forces us or you in general, when you face this kind of solution, to stop, to raise a red flag, and to try to investigate and to try to understand how this third-party content is used. And some other, it's easy, there are permissive license, so there is no issue. So when we dig into this kind of GPL, we can find different cases. If, for example, it's an operating system, typically you have your code runs on top of Linux. So de facto, because it runs on top of Linux, you have some dependency with some core feature of Linux. It's considered as an example of prerequisites because it's acceptable and it's understandable that your code doesn't force the end user to install Linux to run your code. It's just we assume that the code should be there. The operating system should be there on his machine to run it. So there is no issue with that. On the other one, it's a little bit more ambiguous because you see the arrow. It's optional. If you have a dependency with a feature, but this feature is optional, so you don't force your user to install it. You have the possibility in the configuration file or during the setup to let him choose to install or not install a third-party component which is under the GPL license. In this case, it's also accepted. So globally, it's two main cases where it's accepted. You have another case which is pretty similar to the operating system. It's, for example, if you have a dependency with a database, which is a GPL database. If you don't change the database behavior, you just use APIs. So it means that you can use the database because you find it you are more comfortable with this one. It's pretty efficient. But we know that you can use another database with the same APIs, which will deliver the same results, but maybe not as efficient as the one that you are using. So you have the user has a choice to say, okay, I don't want to use this one because it's under the GPL. I want to use the other one, and he has just to change it, and it will work fine. It will work fine as well. So is this kind of optional choice of dependency choice. So it's important to understand that, and we will help you in the during the open call to go through this all your code to figure it out, this kind of issue, and to raise when there is an issue. Now you can solve some of them. For example, I show you can maybe some of this option you can make them optional. It's one possibility. Sometimes also what we do is we contact the owner of the code. So it's the organization or a group of people developing this code, and we ask them, hey guys, do you mind to switch from GPL to more friendly license, business friendly license like Apache, Eclipse, or whatsoever? And it happens sometimes that people answer you. Sometimes they just ignore you, but sometimes they accept and they answer you positively, and they do, and then it solves your problem. If you are not able to make it happen, and for you this dependency is not optional, you have to find either another component which does almost the same job and which is in not under this kind of GPL license, or in the worst case, you have to write the piece of code by yourself and to avoid and to select a correct license in this case. So I mentioned here that maybe on some cases we don't have the information on the license, so we need to dig into the code. Sometimes we have, for example, for this version, we have the information on our database. We know that this version is totally under the Apache license. Here they have a new version. As I told you, this from one version to another one, the owner can decide to change for another license, and we need to verify and to update our own database to be sure that this new version of this component is still under a permissive or weak copyleft license. Okay, last part, open source at Nemo. How does it work? First, as I mentioned at the beginning, Nemo has adopted an open source and open collaboration approach. But it means that they really want to follow open source best practices and try to do their best to follow. And it's what we ask also to our open calls, is to follow the open source best practices. What are they? First is transparency. Transparency means that all your development should be made, we offer you a GitLab infrastructure, which it's an ultimate version of GitLab, so it's has the most features on this one and all the capabilities on this one. So we ask you to develop on this platform. So if you have already some code, you push the initial code on GitLab, you will have your own subgroup on GitLab, and you develop transparently on that. Why it's important to be transparent? Not just because we want to control what you are doing. We don't really care. For us, it helps because if you have an issue which can easily exchange with the rest of the team of Nemo to say, hey guys, we are using this API, it doesn't work as expected. So you can directly share your code and not share it privately. If we find the issue and we fix the issue, everybody else can take advantage of that and say, oh, I have the same issue. Oh, by the way, it has been fixed on the new version. So all this transparency is important. Also, we can exchange with you when we Eclipse identify some potential issue that I listed before. We can write you an issue. For example, with one of the open call, it's not the case, and I wanted to write them some issues, and I couldn't do it because they didn't give me this freedom to do it. So transparency is very important for us. Openness means that we accept everybody. So generally in Nemo, we are not. Openness goes with vendor neutrality. So we accept everybody. And for the long run, meritocracy. Meritocracy, it's very important to understand that when you open source your code, doesn't mean that everybody can touch it. Everybody can fork it. Okay, they can do it. You did some code, they want to change it. They will not change your code. They will make a fork and they will change their code. Now, if you identify some people who are good contributors, they understand what you have developed and they are in the same vision as your project, you say, hey, I will love to have this guy in my team. You can invite him to join the project. And it's what we name meritocracy. And Eclipse for us is very important. So we have a meritocratic process. not during the development you do, but after that for the long run, when the project is sustainable, when we make help you guys to identify these kind of people, and either you will invite somebody to join because he contributed in the documentation, he did fix some bugs, he submitted some merge requests to fix some bugs, he didn't change the code directly, and you accept these changes and so on. If you reject, say no, if you do this change, it doesn't go in the direction we want to go, so we will don't accept. You can totally reject these changes. Fair enough, he can continue to do his development on his own forks, that's fine. But so either you can invite him to join, it's what we name a nomination, or somebody can ask to join. And in this case, also it goes through a nomination process. And in any case, all the existing committers will have to accept his coming. And if there is one veto, the veto will have to justify. As nominated person, you will have to justify why you want to have him in the project. The guy who will veto it will have to justify. And for example, his justification cannot be, no, I don't want to have him because actually it's my competitor on the market. No. If, for example, something happened like that, you or the newcomer can go to Eclipse and say, guys, I did all this contribution. I should be part of the project. They reject me because I'm a competitor with your other partner. Then we at the foundation, we can mention that they have to follow the rules of the Eclipse Foundation, and if he deserves to be part of the project, you have to let him in. So it's some important best practices that we ask you to follow. And so as I mentioned, Nemo selected the Apache license 2.0. So please be compatible with that. And also we follow what we name as a research lab approach in our projects, which is this one. So usually when we have a research project, we have several partners coming with some existing code. A part of the code they want to open source it. Another one of the code they don't want to open source it. So we let them open source the code in what we name a research lab. As I mentioned, it's a GitLab. And because of that, we are able to identify the authors and the contributors of this code. And we are able to identify what we mean with contributor agreement. Contributor agreement, I will show just on the next slide, is you will have to do an electronic signature saying that the code that you are sharing, not only you understand that it will be open source, you understand that also your organization agreed that you open source your code. And if the part of this code is not developed by you, by somebody else, somebody else also agreed to let you open source his code. So it's very important, like that the Nemo project is protected against somebody who can jump on you and say, hey, this code is not yours, you did it. We can retrieve, say, but this author told us that he agreed to share. And he said, yes, but actually it was wrong. We at least the partner are protected, or you are protected as well, because you might have to use also this kind of code from somebody else. In parallel, we also do some analysis of dependencies, and to identify if there are some issues in terms of compatibility with the Apache license. And then, and it's the next step we will do. It's the part of the project, or all the Nemo project will move to a new status within Eclipse project. And Eclipse project, it takes some time, and we have the reputation to have some work to do. And it's for this reason that we start doing this work ahead of time, like that. Committer paperwork is much faster, and all the contribution questionnaire with compatibility issue, it's also done early enough to make things happen in 2 weeks. We have an average of 2 or 3 weeks to create an Eclipse project. When actually, usually, if you want to push your code in Eclipse, because you have to go through all this process, it can take up to 6 months. So because of this intermediate state that we offer to our research projects, we are much faster in delivering an Eclipse project at the end. So you could be part of an Eclipse project, and for you as a developer or as an organization, the fact that you are one of the more than 400 open source project in the Eclipse Foundation, which is already recognized as the biggest European open source foundation, I think it's a good reference for you and for your staff. Here I wanted to share with you also this certificate of origin, or also we name it Eclipse Contributor Agreement. To remind you, it's electronic signature, so you have to sign this document. So to check each of these questions, to verify each of these questions, talk to your organization, of course, and then after that you have to make your electronic signature saying that you agree. And then after that, you're on the safe side. And as soon as you push any code in Eclipse, this certification works. If you didn't sign it, your code will not be accepted by Eclipse by default. So you will not be able to be a contributor if you didn't sign it. So for us, it's a protection. We protect not only our members, but also we protect the users of your code, right? Because we know that the code that is available in Eclipse is code which is actually clean in terms of IP. Current infrastructure, you can see we have a dedicated subgroup inside the Eclipse Research Lab named Nemo Project. Under this subgroup, we have all the members of this subgroup are the member of the Nemo project. So you will receive all the guys that you will work with. And then after that, we have Open Call 1, Open Call 2, and you have all the projects that are subgroups. And on this subgroup, you will be member of this subgroup only. So you will have possibility to change whatever you want in your subgroup. All the repositories should be public. As I said, we talk about transparency. Don't hide anything, even if the code is not stable enough. Fair enough, you put in your README file that it's not stable, but at least people can read what you are doing, say, wow, it's interesting, I want to follow up, and they will follow up on your project. And if you need to attract people sooner than later, it's very important to have this level. So as soon as you will be selected for the Open Call 2, we will create you a subgroup for each of you, and we'll ask you to go through this process, create an Eclipse account, which is totally free, sign the Eclipse Contributor Agreement, and request the access, and we will give you access to your subgroup. You will have, of course, access to the other in README mode, but you will have all the possibility to edit on the new one. I mentioned the header. It's also some services that we provide. Each text file should have a header like that when you specify the copyright, the year, and the owner. And the owner should be by default the name of your organization and/or yourself if you are in Germany. If you have several partners, several organizations involved, you can specify either a list of other owners or say and others. It helps. After that, you specify the license that you want to use, and it's optional. You can specify the contributor as well. Some people like to keep their name, a track of their name, and I understand that. And you can add the track of their name, and you add this copyright. If you already come with, I will say, 1,000 of files, we have a software to generate this copyright for you. So we can generate them and propose a merge request, and you have to accept the merge request. We will never push the code and put the copyright for you. We just create it. So when you receive the merge request, please check it immediately, because it happens to me recently on one project. People wait for 6 months before accepting, or 3 months before accepting the merge request. And of course, the merge request was obsolete because in between, some file disappears, some new files appeared, and so on. So it creates some mess. So they could not accept the merge request. So try to accept sooner, like that at least most of your file will already have the correct copyrights, and you will only have to add these templates, these comments on the new files that you will create. Of course, you have to adapt the comment to the language. If you use HTML, for example, XML files or whatsoever, you will have to adapt the comment as we do it always. And actually, our tool does that. So to finish, what we offer when you work with us, we will do this copyright check for you to see if you did the copyright. If not, we will ask you to do it, not to protect us, but to protect you, to protect your work. We will also list, sometimes people forget about the license file. There is a file license to put. You can have dual licenses on some cases. You have to justify why you need to dual licenses, but you might use dual licenses. Dual licenses, that mean that you might want to use two licenses for different reasons. Some cases it makes sense, sometimes it doesn't. So we are here to help you, not to blame you, but really to help you. I have some knowledge because I'm involved in this kind of stuff for several years, but we have an IP team inside Eclipse which are really expert in this kind of thing. So in very complex cases, usually I delegate this task, this question to my colleagues, and they are very helpful and willing to really find a solution for us. And also, we'll check the documentation. Sometimes people just on GitLab by default, when you create a new repository, you had a default README file, which can be useful when you are a new developer starting with one repository. But when you start developing several repositories, totally useless. So we identify this kind of default documentation and say maybe you should have a more useful, more informative documentation and README files. So we do this kind of check for you as well in terms of open source good practices. That's it on my side. Do you have any question? Or in the meantime, I didn't check if you have any question.